So today was the second event of the project, New Approaches to Teaching Appeasement in the Classroom. The first element was a one-day event for teachers and their students from high school. And we had 80 students and a really interesting group of teachers to come and watch a performance of The Nervous State, which is the dramatization of F.L. Lucas's Journal Under the Terror, 1938.
The dramatic format gives them a way into history that quite often they miss out on if they're just studying a kind of standard GCSE type course, because we very much have to teach them the kind of big political events. Something like this dramatic piece gives them the chance to kind of view history from below and to connect with its impact on real people. It gives them the chance to really think about source evaluation, which is a very important part of their GCSE studies, but it gives them a very intensive kind of way of thinking about how we look at texts and how we relate them to wider historical questions.
The playwright is Nicola Baldwin. She also directed the play on the 19th of April, and we had an excellent response. After the play itself, we broke up into 3 groups for the students. We had 3 immersive exercises. We wanted to see how students dealt with the material, the genres, the different types of sources that we were introducing them to. So we had one exercise which was on journals and journaling, getting students to write their own journal entries. But what have you done before you came to this event? What are your reflections on what you just saw? They had a chance to think about how they would make their mark, how that they would create their own archival material, how they would chronicle their own moment in history. The next session was on documents. So they looked at different documents from this period, from this moment. One was an entry from F.L. Lucas's journal. One was a diary letter from the then Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. And another was a mass observation document. And they were asked to compare and contrast these 3 documents and try to think about the different viewpoints, perspectives, emotional responses that these 3 people from very different walks of life and involved in the Munich crisis in very different ways, some at the center of it, some very much at the peripheries, how they responded and how they wrote about that response.
I think the sources were particularly interesting because one of them, the first one we covered, it was a woman, and which may sound unusual, but you never, when you're reading these sources in history, it's always well-educated men that've gone to Oxford and Cambridge. Mm-hmm. They're very experienced. They're normally political figures, and to see a woman who just lives an average life having such an educated response to pressing events is really interesting to see because it's something completely different to the norm.
The third exercise was a scene study led by Nicola Baldwin, where she worked with the students and trying to get them to step in the shoes of the characters and own the production themselves.
Doing the piece a number of times with different audiences in different contexts has really allowed a dialogue with the material. Normally, when you're working on a play, you're refining towards a final goal. So each stage, you've got a particular audience in mind, you're just making it better. What's great about working with Julie and the questions that come up in the process is that the material becomes interrogated differently, it becomes more responsive to different uses, and I think it's made me more open about the process, which has been a great opportunity really to think differently.
History is something that's happened in the past, but it really did happen, so being able to watch it as a piece of drama, they're able to see it relived, and they're able to see what emotionally that meant. So it's not just about facts and about looking at something objectively. They can see it from an emotional perspective. They start to feel that sense of, all right, this is how it felt, or this is how those events made people actually feel. And drama, I think being able to see that as a history student, being able to watch that live in action really adds that sense of what happened.
I think watching people actually perform, it helps you to relate because you can see the same emotions, the same attitudes that people nowadays have towards issues that are somewhat similar to the same issues that they were dealing with. Yeah. And it shows how people's reactions don't really change throughout history, even with like seeing, even if it doesn't have that big a difference, they still have those same reactions and they still feel the same way about different issues.
I think the play was really interesting because I haven't heard of Lucas before, and the whole idea of him sort of presenting his political thought really as a journal, and then being paid to do that, I think presents a really interesting conversation about how we use sources and how useful they are and how you evaluate them. So I enjoyed that as something we could unpick in the classroom. And again, the immersive exercises with the sources and the journal writing. The students having some very good conversations there, and that's the sort of thing you could replicate in the classroom.
So the project has been in two parts. The second part was today, and we held a teachers' conference. We had teachers from different parts of the country, mainly from around the Yorkshire region, and they came to work with us to reflect on different ways of delivering new approaches to teaching appeasement in the classroom. We had 4 sessions. The first was on scholarship, which is one that I led, which gave them a historiographical overview, bringing them up to speed on how the history of appeasement has been studied, the different points of view, the debates, the polarization and ideological divisions about how appeasement has been studied, the kinds of sources that traditionally have been used to tell the story. And then that built into trying to think about the new approaches and the new methods and the fresh sources that they could use, which revealed something very different, a history from below of appeasement, not just the top down, not just the great men, guilty men story, but a history from below. And actually, even more innovative, a history from within, because we were trying to do history as empathy, trying to deal with sources which are intimate, personal, which give psychological insight into the experience of living in a time of deep crisis and of terrible suspense, which is exactly what dominated people's thoughts and feelings at that very moment in time in September 1938.
So I think mass observation is really valuable when you're looking at issues around history from below. Mass observation is set out to record the thoughts, opinions, feelings and experiences of ordinary people in Britain, and set about capturing the voices of those who so often went unrecorded in official records of the day, or whose thoughts and feelings were purported to be so in the press of the day. And mass observation set out to really challenge this and to see what ordinary people really thought and felt and what their lived experiences were. So I think that's why it's really, really important when we're looking at the history from below that we include mass observation.
I think Julie's work is important in relation to the study of appeasement, because one of the things that she's been able to achieve is to use a set of materials which no other historian appears to have utilised before in the study of public reactions to appeasement. And I'm talking particularly about the richness of the mass observation archive. So historians of the Second World War and post-war events have made extensive use of the public opinions that they can find in that source material. Whereas before Julie, very few historians, if any, seem to have utilised that resource. And that gives a freshness and more universal approach to generalising about how the British people felt at that time.
So the point of this project was to exchange knowledge, to exchange experience, to exchange best practice with people from outside academia. So teachers, artists, playwrights, examiners.
The emphasis on teaching history from below, I think, is something which is a valuable corrective to the way in which history has traditionally been taught. I mean, it's largely been the history of elites and largely the history of white male elites. And this is one way in which we can kind of not necessarily counteract that, because that does have a role, but to indicate to students that in fact history is a much broader canvas than just the, if you like, the great men of history.
The biggest thing I'll take away was the sources, because the presentation we had from the mass observation was just immense. How it was set up, why it was set up, what its purpose was, how it runs today, how to access those resources, how I can embed those resources with students. And there is a massive amount of resources I could work through. They're going to be catalogued and they will be put into sections. So that will be my biggest teaching takeaway.
What sort of bringing drama, for instance, into lessons on the late 1930s is allow students to get into the shoes of characters, to really think about how different demographics of people were feeling at that time. And that makes history more real for students. It makes it more accessible. It makes it more relevant to them when they can really kind of immerse themselves. And that's the importance of some of these immersive activities that we've been looking at today. How do you immerse students and get them not only thinking about different perspectives in history, but to get them to really feel history and to get them excited about it. That's something that's really difficult to do from just the traditional method of looking at sources to like newspaper cartoons or newspaper extracts. Those are all, again, really important sources, and we have to still study those. But it doesn't get every student hyped up to really want to learn about appeasement. And these kind of immersive exercises that we've been discussing today opens those doors. So yeah, I think that's really important, really valuable, and I'm really hoping that one of the things that's going to come from this is a set of sources, lesson plans, resources that teachers can use to get them students more immersed in history, not just in like late 1930s and appeasement and the Munich crisis, but how we might be able to bring these other pedagogies into everything we do as educators and as historians teaching in the classroom.
So for me, the big kind of takeaway point is about how it changes my view of my sources, how it makes me think differently. And actually, you know, in some ways, I don't know if academics always do kind of history through empathy. And that was really unique. I also, in discussing things with Nicola and with other, you know, project collaborators, I realized that we work in kind of disciplinary silos in a way that is quite limiting. And by working with Nicola, she's a playwright, she's the artist, she's the creative person. But actually, by working with her, she got a chance to be a historian, and I got a chance to be the creative person, or bring out my own creativity and apply it to my scholarship. So today was a midway point, not at all the end of the process. It's very much, in some ways, the beginning, actually. We've now generated a number of resources that teachers can use. And now it's about seeing them actually use this material in the classroom to get the feedback from the teachers about how it's working, what works, what doesn't work, what we could do better, what kind of sources they could introduce to students that will change their thinking and that will make students think outside the box, prepare them even better for the way we're teaching history today.